Good afternoon and welcome to our live webcast of Open Book, Open Mind Online. I'm Ariel Zeitlin. I'm a librarian at the Montclair Public Library, and all of us at the library are very excited to bring you the second of our long-running literary series through this virtual platform. We are so happy to be bringing you Jesse Wegman, who's the author of Let the People Pick the President, the case for abolishing the Electoral College. He's in conversation with Jim Johnson, the activist, attorney, and former U.S. Treasury official. Before Jesse and Jim's discussion, I'm going to go over some housekeeping details. There's also a tech tips handout, which is available in your handouts. I'm going to disappear for a minute just so you can see my screen. Okay, so now, whether you're using a phone, a tablet, or a computer, you have the same controls and go to webinar. The really important part is the question mark or the chat box, which is your link to me and my librarian co-host during the webcast. You can click on it to chat with us for live tech help. You'll also use that text box to send us your questions for the author Q&A at the end. So here they are. This is the question mark, or you go down to the questions box and you type your questions in right there. Now, when you're sending us your questions for the author Q&A at the end, please do include your town in your question, just so we know where you're from. Now, back to us. Okay, so my co-host librarian today is Molly Hone, our head of adult services. Hi, Molly.
Hi, everybody. Hello.
You won't see Molly after this, but she'll be online and available for tech support throughout the webcast. Just type your query in the questions area and Molly will help you. She'll also be receiving your questions for the Q&A and she'll be forwarding them to Jim Johnson. Thank you, Molly.
Thanks.
Now, back to our program. The Open Book, Open Mind series is sponsored by the Montclair Library Foundation, the Montclair Foundation, and the Investors Foundation. We also thank our advisory panel for all of their guidance and support. Now, I'd like to introduce Jared Miller, who's a board member of the Montclair Public Library Foundation. Welcome, Jared.
Hi, hope everyone is doing well. We are so pleased that you're all here for our second webcast of Open Book, Open Mind Online. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Library Foundation. We're a group of your friends and neighbors, and our mission is to raise funds that help make possible many of the free programs and services that make our library so special. On average, the Foundation's fundraising supports about 5% of the library's budget, and we're utilized by the library as a source of opportunistic investment. For example, as we've progressed through the pandemic, the Foundation has been tapped to support the significant growth in e-content. For example, between March and April, Overdrive, Libby, an ebook platform, was up 59%, Canopy, an entertainment service, was up 119%, Hoopla, another ebook entertainment platform that is offered by the library, was up 102%, and online library card registrations were up 93%. In these unprecedented times, the Montclair Public Library remains a constant thanks to the caring support of generous donors like you. Please consider donating to your library through our website, mplf.org. A gift of any size will have an impact. And now, enjoy the program.
Thank you, Jared. We so appreciate the generous support of the Foundation and all that you do to help us. Now, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Jesse Wegman. You've probably read Jesse Wegman's work and not even known it, because he's a member of the New York Times editorial board. Jesse has also written extensively about the Supreme Court and legal affairs for the Times since 2013. Before that, he worked as a reporter, editor, and producer at media outlets including NPR, the New York Observer, Reuters, the Daily Beast, and Newsweek. He's also a graduate of NYU Law School. Welcome, Jesse. I can't hear you. Jesse, I can't hear you. Can you turn on your mic? Excellent.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're so delighted that you can come. I'm also very pleased to introduce Jesse's conversation partner, Jim Johnson. Jim is currently serving as the Corporation Counsel of the City of New York. He has advocated for social justice reform in a wide variety of roles, including 7 years as chair of the Brennan Center for Social Justice. Jim held several roles in the Clinton Foundation administration, most notably Undersecretary of the U.S. Treasury. He's also a longtime resident of Montclair. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you so much. And thank you.
Okay.
And Jesse, good to see you.
Likewise.
So first off, congratulations. You've written a really fun, engaging, and from my perspective, thought-provoking book. And I also say it's pretty hopeful because it is about how we can make our democracy better. And as I read it, I see your belief in this, a long arc towards progress. And right about now, that's a terrific thing to do. I should note that I'm not here in my official capacity, but as most of my life resident and actually born in Montclair. And my first reading experiences were at the Montclair Public Library, now longer ago than I would care to report at this stage, but it's been a while, and it's a terrific, terrific institution. We need hope right now, Jesse. We're in an epic moment of upheaval. In some respects, it's unprecedented to have both the pandemic facing us and tremendous concern and upset in our streets, in our legislators, in our home. Folks are demanding change, particularly on the lines of racial justice. I was in Columbine shortly after the murders there, and then and there was upset and there was advocacy for change, and we thought this was the moment. And when it came to gun safety, nothing happened. I watched in horror with when Katrina hit Louisiana, and we thought this was the moment when people would see the inequality in this nation and bring about and advocate for significant change. And that didn't come. And we're now at a moment where people are in the streets advocating for change, and change in some respects is coming. But if you studied, and I know you have, and you're going to tell us about it, American history, some of the changes that are coming have been things that people have been asking for a very, very long time. And I'm not going to ask you whether or not this time is going to be different. You didn't write that book. I'm going to ask you whether or not a change in the Electoral College and the whole process of choosing our leaders might actually have an impact on our ability to solve these problems in our seemingly dysfunctional democracy. Jesse, there's a huge appetite for change, and yet we can't seem to do it. And as I read your book, I think that the Electoral College has something to do with it. So you want to give us sort of a top view on that?
Sure, and thanks so much. Thanks to Montclair Public Library and Ariel for having me, and thanks, Jim, to you for moderating this event. I do want to say, it can be hard in moments like this when we're faced so directly with the visceral reality of inequality and injustice in our streets and in our communities, and particularly the treatment of Black Americans by law enforcement, to sort of wrap our heads around these somewhat more abstract, longer term reforms like the Electoral College, which, let's face it, it's only once every 4 years at best that people are concerned about the Electoral College. And it's been 5 times in American history where the college has gone against what the majority of the voters in the country have chosen. So, some people might say, well, why should we care about that? Look at what's happening right now. And I do think there is actually an interesting link here, and an important link. And that is that in both cases, what we're talking about, well, let's first just talk about what's happening in the streets right now, which is people coming out to say, we are not being listened to, we are not being heard, you are not paying attention to our voices, to our lives, to our interests. And I think that's a very legitimate grievance, and particularly coming from certain communities in this country. It's one that has been ignored for far too long. And I think the story of the Electoral College is in some ways similar. It is people saying, we are not being heard in the political process, our interests, our voices, our value as American citizens is debased by the process of electing the president. And so I do think that there's a way to think about all of these things together as an effort to create equality, a political equality among all Americans. That's the value of one person, one vote that I think we all subscribe to, or most of us, I would hope, subscribe to. And I think that's really at the heart of this reform. It's not about destroying the America the framers built. It's not about giving the cities more power and the rural areas less power. All of these things are as we'll talk about, are misconceptions or just outright myths. But it's really about making people's voices heard equally and making everyone's voice matter equally in the choice of the leader who represents everyone equally.
Well, you mentioned one person, one vote, and how all of us believe in one person, one vote, most of us. That certainly wasn't always the case, and that definitely wasn't the case with the framers. And so one of we've evolved to this point where we are talking about, and I believe since it's been constitutional adoption since the 60s in Baker versus Carr, that there should be one person for every vote. Why don't you tell us about how we got started and how the Electoral College came to be?
Sure.
That wasn't the principle behind it.
It wasn't, it's true. Though the views of the framers on who should be involved in choosing the president and who should be involved in politics more generally are much more nuanced and more conflicted than I think a lot of us have been led to believe by basic civics class. You know, the story that we get told is, oh, the framers.
Civics.
I'm sorry, yeah, right.
If we still took civics.
Right. Sorry, I'm dating myself here. The story that a lot of us have heard, or that a lot of us believe, is the framers feared democracy, right? And that's a very simple story to tell, and there's evidence supporting it. Some of the framers at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, where they adopted the Constitution, did say things like, democracy, or the excesses of democracy, and they were afraid of people having too direct a role. But that's really an incomplete story. There were actually several of the framers were quite interested in having all the eligible voters involved. Now, obviously, eligible voters at that time is nothing like what we consider eligible voters today, which is virtually all adults. Then it was just white propertied males. And yet, even still, you can see interesting and important distinctions in how the delegates came to their political views. And I focus on one, James Wilson in particular, who nobody seems to remember today. He was a Pennsylvania delegate. He was really the most respected lawyer in the country at the time, and one of the most important delegates at the convention. He fought tirelessly that summer in 1787 for a popular vote for president, for the people to directly choose their president, not for it to be done through Congress, as some delegates wanted, not for it to be done by state governors, as other delegates wanted, not even for an electoral college. But for a direct election of the president. Now, he lost in the end, and there are several reasons why he lost. But I really just want to emphasize this point, that this ideal of direct participation in our government has been there from the founding. The framers themselves believed in it. Some of the most important ones believed in it themselves. And so the reason that we have an electoral college is more complicated. This issue they debated constantly throughout the convention. That whole summer they were fighting over it. They couldn't decide on a way to pick a president for several reasons. One is they'd never had a president before. They were doing this for the first time. Another reason is they understood the basic limitations of society at that time, which was, people didn't travel very far from their homes. There was no transportation network, no real roads, obviously no paved roads. There was no communications network. There were only a few newspapers starting to develop. So people didn't know very much about politicians beyond their local area. And the framers were, I think, understandably concerned that they wouldn't know anything about candidates for a national office. And therefore, that was one of the reasons they decided to create this intermediary body of people who would presumably know more about those candidates and make a wiser choice for the good of the whole country. Then, of course, there is the issue of slavery, which is threaded through the entire convention and infects every part of the Constitution and was central to the creation of the legislature we now have, the national legislature, both the Senate and the House of Representatives. So all of these factors play into the creation of an electoral college and in the end give us the system that we still largely have today. It's been altered somewhat by the 12th Amendment, but you know, it's an important thing to remember that it was adopted at a time where the country was radically different, both in terms of its size, its population, who could vote, who lived here, what the beliefs were about what different people were entitled to do or had the capacity to do. And so I think it's very hard to sort of go back and spend too much time thinking about what did the framers think about how we should choose a president, because their entire mindset was so completely different and they lived in such a totally different era.
So let's talk about choosing a president, because we've now chosen 45 of them in a variety of different ways. We've had a couple of times where the popular vote has actually exceeded the Electoral College vote. And that leads to one question: does anybody else do it this way?
Not in any modern democracies. Yeah, you would think, wouldn't you, that if it were such a brilliant design, as we've been told it is by some of its defenders, that it would have been adopted elsewhere, but it hasn't been. In fact, I believe Finland had a version of it for much of the 20th century and then got rid of it. And interestingly, we talked about one person, one vote. That was a series of, that's a phrase that the Supreme Court came up with in the early 1960s in a series of cases that they decided that dealt with representation at the legislative level, so in the state and federal legislatures. And the first of those cases came about as a response to an electoral college-like system in the state of Tennessee. And that's what's really interesting, is the justices struck down that electoral college-like system for state elections because it violated this principle of one person, one vote, that everybody's vote counts equally. And they said in that ruling, the obvious implication of that ruling was, we have an electoral college at the federal level, why is that okay? And the justices anticipated that because they're, smart people. They knew that question would come up. And they said, essentially, yes, that also violates the principle of one person, one vote, our federal electoral college, but there's nothing we can do about it because it's right there in the Constitution. So I think that's a really interesting admission on the part of the High Court to say, sure, this system absolutely violates our ideal of one person, one vote. It's in the Constitution. If you want to change it, you got to amend the Constitution.
So there are a couple of big strands that you have tossed out there that I'm going to pull out a little bit. One, just a second ago, you talked about how there are several factors that led to the current structure, and one of which was slavery and how we dealt with it. Slavery is often discussed as, and it should be, the nation's original sin. But it's usually spoken about that in the very, very important moral terms of the absolute depravity of slavery. One of the things that comes out in your book is that it wasn't just a problem, and that alone it would be enough to abolish it of its moral aspects, but it was also a huge design flaw in getting anywhere near the idea of one person, one vote, and led to dysfunction in the system. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, I think, the nation is founded, on this premise, this radical premise of universal human equality, right? This is in the Declaration of Independence itself. All men are created equal. Obviously, it's still a male idea then, but still, even then, that's a radical idea that people are created equal. And I think so clearly that ideal was not even close to met in practice for, I would say not even, we couldn't even arguably say it was until 1965 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. But I think what you see is this slow, what you mentioned in your introduction, which was this broader, slow arc of democratization, that at every step along the way, virtually every step along the way, when there has been a fork in the road and when there has been a choice to be made, we have chosen to go the path of our founding ideal toward more equality, toward greater inclusion, not exclusion, but inclusion. So that begins with the removal of property qualifications. Lots of states had property qualifications for voting and holding office at the founding, but the Constitution very notably did not include that. States started dropping their property qualifications, and poorer whites were able to participate in the political process. Then obviously we have the Civil War, we have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which enfranchise and make citizens of Black Americans. Then we have the women's suffrage in the early 20th century.
Men at the time, actually, just men at the time.
I'm sorry.
Just after the Civil War was just men that were enfranchised, not all African Americans. Women had to wait.
I'm sorry. Yes. Oh, yes, of course. Men only. Right. And even then, of course, in name only, it took another 100 years and the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act to put any federal muscle behind those promises. But then we have women's suffrage, that's starting in the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th and culminating in the amendment. And then we have, the direct election of senators, which they were selected by state lawmakers, but then now the people themselves were involved in choosing the senators. The reduction of the voting age from 21 to 18. At every step along the way, we see this greater, expanding democracy. Now, obviously, this isn't a smooth arc. It's not it doesn't, it goes backward. There are regressions. I think we are in a regression right now. But I think, and obviously we're seeing the lack of the promise lived up to in these marches in the streets, but that's also, to me, a hopeful sign that people still believe in that enduring original value and are trying to make America live up to that value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, it's like there are two things going on. You have Martin Luther King's moral arc of the universe bending towards justice, which actually was Theodore Parker's idea in the mid-19th century, stated in a different way. And then you have Arthur Schlesinger's view, sort of a sine curve of cycles of American history. Yes. So it's all headed, we hope, in a pretty good direction, but there are periods of definitely of retrenchment. You had talked about, and I found this a really, to me, it was a fascinating little nugget in the book, where you just mentioned Jefferson's ideals in at least what he wrote in the Declaration of Independence, all created equal. And what I was really fascinated to find out is that this person who we don't talk about as one of the founders, James Wilson, we don't talk about him very much. It seems like Jefferson may have cribbed his idea from Wilson. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of how Wilson came to be such an advocate for the common mayor.
I spent an entire chapter on James Wilson, in part because I'm so fascinated by him and I didn't know anything about him. I was embarrassed not to know anything about him. And then I felt a little better when I asked around and virtually no one else knew anything about him. He was one of the 6 founding fathers to sign both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. He had a vision of democracy. He was an immigrant, like Alexander Hamilton. He was an immigrant. He came from Scotland. He was raised in a poor religious farming family in the lowlands of Scotland, and he came over as a 23-year-old right into the heart of the growing movement toward American independence. And he became one of the loudest and most eloquent voices for that independence. He became a lawyer. He trained, he apprenticed as a lawyer and then became a lawyer. And he actually became a very successful and wealthy lawyer. His story, the reason we don't know about him is quite a tragic one. And I tell it briefly in chapter 1 of the book. And it has to do with the way that his life spiraled out of control and he died very young, soon after the Constitutional Convention. But in the time in which he had to influence his fellow founding fathers, he really brought out an ideal of democracy, an ideal of, I think, expansive, people-based republic rather than a sort of a state-based. He really, that was the essence of his vision. And I think even 100, 200 years later, people were citing him who were arguing in favor of a national popular vote because they could see even in 1780, 1790, he could see into the future in a way that none of the other framers could. I really think it was his upbringing, his religious upbringing, and his training in the Scottish Enlightenment. He was literally schooled at St. Andrews by the Scottish by the greatest thinkers of the Scottish Enlightenment, And a lot of that thinking was about human equality and about inclusion rather than exclusion. The Scots were different from the British in that way. And I really think Wilson was imbued with those values. He brought them over to America, and I think we still live with them today, the echoes of them today. So I can't recommend enough just learning more about James Wilson. I think he's a fascinating and understudied figure in American history for most of us who think we know the big ones in Alexander Hamilton and Jefferson and Washington and Madison and all of them. So yeah, I could talk about him forever, but he's a fascinating figure in the choice he was the first delegate to speak up in favor of a direct vote for president in the first week of the convention, and he was arguing for it all the way through until the end. He lost for the reasons that we discussed, but he was an advocate for it.
And he was one of the nation's top lawyers, and he could not get that. He couldn't persuade that jury.
Yeah, right. Well, there was the jury had a lot of other interests.
Yeah. And those are tremendous, and they are still with us. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on is basically what's you have in this, at least embedded, it's kind of a theory of change. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a gravitational inevitability towards change, but you definitely perceive it, you anticipate it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you think, given your review of many efforts to change this particular piece of the Constitution, rather the constitutional scheme, what is your theory of change?
Well, it's funny. I think let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of this system, because I think that's one thing a lot of us don't understand or think we understand, but have it wrong. The Electoral College, as it exists in the Constitution, is a fairly bare bones structure. The Constitution allots to each state a number of electors equal to its representation in Congress. So that means however many representatives in the House it has and its 2 senators, that's how many electors a state gets. So every state gets that. That's and then there's a few other provisions dealing with what happens if it's a tie vote or if no one gets a majority of electors. Beyond that, this is a state-based institution. All of the decisions about how the Electoral College functions on a quadrennial basis, those are state-based decisions, and I just don't think most people understand that. So when we look at that map, right, that red and blue map in the country, this sort of red states and blue states, and we talk about them as red states and blue states, that's really just a visual artifact of what's called the winner-take-all rule. The winner-take-all rule is exactly what it sounds like, which is a state gives all of its electoral votes to the candidate who wins the most votes in that state, no matter how many votes they win by. If it's 1 vote or 1,000 votes or 10,000 votes or 1,000,000 votes, that candidate gets all of the state's electors, the other candidate gets 0. And I think that is at the core of the distortion that the Electoral College introduces into our presidential selection process. And that's because obviously no state is a red state or a blue state. There are millions of Republicans living in California. There are millions of Democrats living in Texas. There are millions of all of us living everywhere. We're a purple country. That's why the cover of my book is essentially a purple cover, right? People live everywhere and support both candidates from both major political parties.
Because it would stick out on my bookshelf.
So I really think that distortion, I think people think about that as inherent in some way to what the Electoral College is in the Constitution, and it's not. The founders, in fact, said nothing about how states were to award their electors. 48 of 50 states today award their electors by that winner-take-all rule. But at the founding, they were trying different systems out. Some were awarding them by congressional district. Some were giving them away by the state lawmakers themselves, where they weren't even including voters in the process. So states were trying all different things out, and it was all legitimate under the Constitution. So I think when you talk about theories of change, I think we can really think about this not just as the only option isn't an amendment, even though I think that's how it's been tried. More than 700 attempts to amend or abolish the Electoral College over the history of the country. That is far more than for any other provision in the Constitution, far more. It is not the only way to get there. So, the one thing that I write about in the book, and I'm happy to talk about at more length, is this effort that's been underway for about 15 years now called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And that's a mouthful, but it's really just a contract among the states to choose to award their electors in a different way than they do now. Instead of giving them to the winner of their statewide vote, they're agreeing by compact to give them to the winner of the national popular vote, the winner of the most votes in all 50 states combined. And I can talk more about why that I think is such a clever and elegant solution to getting us to a popular vote, but it is.
So
it is
I think we have time to go,
using
to go
the
there, so
college.
we'll definitely get there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
But
it is terrific. Yeah.
That's a form of change that I see as being a very plausible one going forward.
Okay, terrific. The one of the other ideas around change that you mentioned in the Baker versus Carr discussion was the evolution of one person, one vote. You had mentioned that Justice Frankfurter definitely wanted the Supreme Court to stay out of the political thickets. But after Justice Frankfurter in the 60s, there was a change of view, which led us to Baker versus Carr. And what you wrote in your book was that it was in part because the justices were paying attention to what was happening in the civil rights arena. Could you develop that idea a little bit more? Because it was, again, it was the idea that the courts were paying close attention and actually responding in a positive way to what was going on in the streets was interesting to me.
Yeah, I really think the courts, basically, what was happening in the 60s was a total revolution in respect to how representative democracy worked. Those one person, one vote cases came out of something that was known as malapportionment. And it's a sort of a close cousin to the partisan gerrymandering issue that we know today. And that was just basically that states could draw their districts however they liked. They could draw a district around 10 people and another district around 10,000 people and give them each the same representation. And in the South, of course, that was done especially to keep Black voters and Black citizens from having anywhere close to equal representation. And it was really insidious. I mean, it was happening all over the country. I don't mean to pin this only on the South, but it was particularly bad in the South.
The New York Board of Estimate was an example of that, right?
Yeah. So it was the egregious discrepancies of malapportionment that led the court to face this issue. And it took them 3 or 4 cases to kind of get all the way through it and apply the one person, one vote rule both to federal legislative districts and to state legislative districts. But once they did that, it was this rapid and amazing transformation in the country where within a few years, virtually every district in the country met the one person, one vote standard, which was, the standard is all districts have to have essentially the same number of citizens in them, which means that everyone is represented by roughly the same, everyone has the same representation. It's not exact right now, it's not perfect, but it became very close to that within just a few years. So you have that happening. You have the civil rights movement, which culminates in the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the justices, I think, this is just another point where, it's not just about what's in the Constitution, but who's interpreting it that matters. The makeup of the Supreme Court matters hugely, and it's why we have such, knockdown, drag-out fights over every confirmation, because who is sitting in those 9 seats matters hugely to what the Constitution means. And in the early 1960s, Justice William Brennan was a hugely important voice in saying, when we have such dramatically distorted political processes, the people themselves cannot possibly do anything about it. The field is tilted against them. It is a vicious circle, and they can't get out of it without judicial help. And I think Brennan saw and convinced enough of his colleagues to see that Frankfurter was just wrong. This wasn't simply the political thicket. This was political, hostage taking of the political process by politicians who wanted to stay in office or who wanted to keep certain people from having an equal say. And the court needed to step in. It was by that. I think I would have said the same thing, exact same thing about partisan gerrymandering today. But Chief Justice Roberts is not Justice William Brennan, and he took more of a Frankfurter approach and said, we're staying out of this. It's a political question. I think he was wrong. I think he was grievously wrong. As Justice Higgins
2 cases decided last summer out of North Carolina and Maryland.
Yes, yeah. And I don't mean to go off on a tangent, only to say that the court has been extremely important in helping us to interpret the Constitution in a way that allows for greater equality and for a vindication of, I think, what the Constitution's founding ideals were. I mean, I think those elements were really playing up in the mid 1960s, and I think the chapter 5 of my book is really the one that I had, in some ways, the most fun writing, because I was learning about this. The chapter is about the effort that got us closer than any other in American history to abolishing the Electoral College. Everybody forgets this today. It was front page news in the late 1960s. We came within just a few votes in the Senate of passing this out to the states for ratification. The House of Representatives actually passed an amendment to abolish the Electoral College in 1969. People don't know that. There were dozens of states that were prepared to get on board and ratify this amendment. Right. The Senate was the only thing standing in the way. It actually was blocked by a filibuster in the Senate by 3 Southern segregationists, some of the same ones who were trying to block the Civil Rights Act a few years earlier, and they succeeded this time. And they killed the amendment in 1970, and we've never come close again since. But that was, we actually came, just sort of painfully close to having a popular vote for president in 1970, and here we're still living with it.
And it feels like there's echoes in that defeat of the distortive effect of slavery at the very moment of founding. When you think that 3 segregationists were the ones that basically barred the door to this forward march of democratic progress.
It's absolutely true. I mean, I use in my book the metaphor of, that the Electoral College is like a core sample drawn from the trunk of the tree of American history, and that when you pull it out, you can see, all of those, rings of, those rings of racial subjugation, of segregation, of slavery, of Jim Crow. You see how they all are impacted by and impact the Electoral College and its functioning and how we choose the president. Black voters, even today, are systematically deprived of their voice in choosing the president throughout the American South, where there are a majority of Republicans voting. Right now, obviously, voting in the South is very polarized by race. So Republicans overwhelmingly support, whites overwhelmingly support Republicans, and blacks overwhelmingly support Democrats. And because there are enough Democrats, enough Republicans in those states, and those states all use the winner-take-all rule, millions and millions of black voters in the South today are just as voiceless in the choice of their president as they were 100 years ago, or even 200 years ago.
Well, at least now they can vote. 200 years ago, they were treated as chattel. But
fair enough. But their voices don't count.
The numerical point follows. That's for sure.
Their voices don't count in the outcome. And so I really think it's and I guess I'm just saying that these echoes of race-based of a democratic system that systematically keeps out people because of the color of their skin, we're seeing it just gets repeated in various iterations throughout our history.
Yeah, I would love to see, take that core sample out and see how thick the rings are with each particular effort to move the Electoral College out of the way, so we can actually continue to make progress. That's another book where you become both, I guess, a horticulturalist as well as a historian. So one small digression, and then we want to get to the multi-state, the compact.
Yeah.
Recently, one of your colleagues, Linda Greenhouse, wrote about the threat to the continued functionality of the Supreme Court right now. And I wondered whether or not you had particular views. We just talked about the difference between having Justice Brennan advocating for one person, one vote, and actually being realistic about the political process, and rejecting Justice Frankfurter's view of the court and keeping out of the political process. We now have Justice Roberts, and you started to touch on the difference between having Roberts and having Brennan, but Linda's piece was more about just the threat to the continued functioning. We'd like to share shed some light on it. I know you didn't write that piece, but do you have a view on that perspective?
Linda is a national treasure. I'm grateful that she's continuing to write about the court and to reflect on thoughts on the court for the nation, because she covered, for those who don't know, she covered she was the Supreme Court correspondent for the Times for 30 years, and now the court is covered also brilliantly by Adam Liptak. But to have people like this covering the court has been I think such a boon to our civic life and to the American understanding of how the court works. I mean, I think Linda's right, and I think I'm very concerned for the court's future as an institution in this country. It's supposed to be, we're supposed to treat it as the one non-political body, right? It's never been that, but there's value in the striving for it, right? Just as I'm a journalist and we talk about objectivity, of course we're not objective, we're human beings, but there's value in the striving. We try to combat our biases, we try to be honest with ourselves about where we might be prejudiced or be getting things wrong, and sometimes we succeed, and that's a good thing. And I think the court really, for a long time, I think there was more of an effort to try to come up with these. You hear Chief Justice Roberts often talk about the value of unanimous decisions, and he's right. It is valuable when the court can speak in one voice, and they try to do that, of course, on these more hot button issues that have become the ones at the center of our national public life in the last several decades. The decisions are almost always 5-4. And I think that just it is an unfortunate reflection of the political polarization of the country. And I do think that it sucks some of the legitimacy out of the court as an institution, because it just looks like another body of political actors, these ones only wearing robes and having the final say. As several justices have said, the latest to say it was Justice Breyer, but I think it goes back to Justice Jackson. We are right because we're final. We are not final because we're right. So having a body that has that ultimate authority and that ultimate say over fundamental contested questions of our constitutional law is a hugely powerful thing to have, and it's really dangerous when it gets politicized.
Right. So the Electoral College is one piece of our political process, and obviously a very important piece. And there have been times when it is at the end of the day, like the court, it's not final because it's right. It's just right because it's final.
Right.
And there have been 4 times when it has been way out of whack with the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, what do our politics look like if we get the change that you've been speaking about?
So the last chapter of this book, chapter 9, was a really fun one to write, and that was where I interviewed campaign managers of both Republican and Democratic presidential campaigns for the last 20 years, also field directors and ground game coordinators, the people who really have to figure out, how do we win? How do we get enough votes to beat the other guy? And that is what they do. That is their job. And I thought, if anyone could tell me how you would run a political campaign that was based on a popular vote election rather than an electoral college election, it would be these people. And so they didn't just talk to me about how they would do it. They talked about what the benefits would be of doing it. And almost to a person, they all favored a popular vote election. They knew it would be more work for them, right? The problem right now with the Electoral College is that it focuses, that winner-take-all rule focuses all of the candidates from both parties' attention and money and policy platforms onto just a few battleground states, because those are the only states where a little extra effort could swing all of those electoral votes from one column to the other. All the other states, 40, 45 states every 4 years, are safe states, what we call safe states. I hate the term because there are still millions of people from both parties in those states, and yet they're safe because we know who's going to win the most votes in that state just based on polling and history.
They're safe for the parties.
They're safe, right?
They're not safe for the people who would get discounted.
Exactly.
I think the better way to say is they are predictable and therefore discountable from a strategic perspective.
Sorry, you just broke up. The better way to say it is what?
Is that they're predictable and therefore discountable from a strategic perspective.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly right. They're we should call them predictable states. And And it's really frustrating. And I think that's at the heart of the distortion here. And the idea behind a popular vote, some of it is the vindication of these principles we've been talking about: one person, one vote, majority rule, right? We all believe in majority rule. Everyone, and anyone who says they don't, just try making them lose the presidency when their candidate wins the popular vote, and you'll see what they say. Majority rule, one person, one vote. These are central principles, but the on the ground practical implications of this, even when a president wins the popular vote and the Electoral College, which is, after all, has happened 40 times out of the 45 presidencies we've had, even then you have this distorting effect of the Electoral College, and that's that battleground state, predictable state divide. So the candidates really only care about a tiny sliver of states and a tiny sliver of the population in those states to swing enough of those voters to the other side to win the presidency. It happened in 2000, 537 votes in Florida gave George W. Bush all 25 of that state's electoral votes, even though the vote was basically, even 3 million between the two candidates. So that kind of distortion, when you play that out on a national level, is hugely corrosive to a representative democracy on the national level. States vote for their governors, they vote for their lawmakers, they vote for their senators. That, when you're you're a state resident when you cast those ballots. But when you're voting for the one office that's supposed to cover the entire country equally, I think you really have to think about it in terms of a national vote. And that's why the popular vote, with all votes counting equally and the person who's getting the most of those votes winning, is the only way we can get to a presidency where the office is represented by someone who is concerned with the interests of the vast majority of Americans.
Right. I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. And I think as we've discussed this, we see all the reasons why the change makes a tremendous amount of sense and could make a significant difference in our democracy. But that's not where we are. You've given us now, we've talked about for a while, the why this change is important. Now let's get to the how. How do we get there from here?
So this popular vote compact that I talked about, it's been going on since 2005. States have been adopting it since then. There's 15 states that have joined the compact. Now these compacts, this interstate compact, states join interstate compacts all the time. There's a discussion even right now, literally, about whether they should be creating interstate compacts among states to share protective equipment during the pandemic, because the federal government is falling down on that. So interstate compacts are a familiar procedure and a familiar mechanism. What it does here, as I mentioned earlier, is the states that join it agree to award their electors. This is constitutional. It's right there in the Constitution. It says states can do this however they want, to award their electors to the winner of the most votes in the country, not to the winner of the most votes in their state. And when states representing a majority of electoral votes in the country have joined onto this compact, that automatically means the person who wins the most votes in the country wins a majority of electoral votes, becomes the president. And that solves this problem of that battleground state, the exclusive attention to battleground states.
So 15 states. How does that solve the problem? Right?
It solves the problem
because you've spoken to the political strategists. We have this compact that ultimately may get enacted or adopted by the different states. What's that do to their thinking about strategy? Let's break it down.
So it means that they realize that in order to win, right now they say, oh, for me to, and this is both Joe Biden and Donald Trump are saying, in order to win, I got to win in these 6 states: Florida, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. That's what it is this year. 4 years ago was a little different. 4 years from now, it'll be a little different. But basically, they change very slowly over time. But there's always a very small number of them. That, I think, itself is the problem. And when you force the candidates, when you say to the candidates, you are only going to win if you win the most votes everywhere across the country, that changes their strategy. They start going everywhere. And this is not, I think that the immediate question here is, well, doesn't this just mean that the cities dominate and that the only places that matter are New York City and San Francisco or whatever it is? And it's just a misunderstanding of the sheer size of cities compared to the size of the country. They are much smaller in relation to the size of the country. The big cities couldn't possibly dominate an election. And in fact, the candidates don't behave that way. When candidates are running in an election where all the votes count and the one who wins the most votes wins, like a governor's election, they actually go all over the state. They'll all tell you that. They'll say, this is just campaigning 101. We go everywhere. I go to the rural areas, I go to the suburbs, I go to the cities, because I know I need the most votes from everywhere. And even if I know I'm going to lose in some area, I just want to lose by less. And so that's why I think you just see that.
That's right. That's why the campaigns are like the greatest time of consumption of corn dogs and things like that, right?
Yeah,
a lot of people going to agricultural fairs.
Right. So this just would count. This would count everybody equally. And I think that's the essential point, is when candidates have to treat all Americans' votes as equal, they then are concerned about what all Americans want. And then we start to get, I think, policies and legislation and governance that reflects the majority of the country and not particular interest groups or smaller slivers of the country that just happen to be in states that are closely divided.
So you've got the book, we've got the idea. We actually have a mechanism short of a constitutional amendment to eliminate or at least neutralize the Electoral College. Then the question becomes, because you're speaking to folks largely in Montclair, but elsewhere, who are active, what can we do to help this along? What's the infrastructure to move these things, this idea from the states that have done it to the more that you need?
Yeah, I mean, one unfortunate thing about these is that the 15 states are all Democratic-led states, or were all Democratic-led when they adopted the compact. And that gives this appearance of partisanship to the effort. In fact, the effort has been driven by both liberals and conservatives. They work on it together, and they've had a great amount of success in convincing individual Republican lawmakers all over the country of the rightness of this idea and of the wisdom of it. They actually had, before the 2016 election, more than 160, I believe, Republicans, co-sponsors of the legislation to create this, to join this compact in the states around the country, which was roughly the same number of Democratic co-sponsors they had. This was a very appealing idea, and it's always an appealing idea if you think you're going to lose the Electoral College. I think this is one of the essential points about the Electoral College, is virtually nobody defends it on the principles, because no one's even sure what the principles are. They just say we're a republic, not a democracy, or small states lose. And none of this is true, as you'll read in my book. That people defend it for one reason, which is they think it's going to help their side win, right? And that's the key point. And when their side looks like it's not going to win, suddenly the Electoral College looks really bad. Donald Trump tweeted, "The Electoral College is a disaster for democracy." He tweeted that in 2012 on election night because it looked like Mitt Romney would win the popular vote and lose the Electoral College. It doesn't take much for people to access that feeling of unfairness and injustice in the way the college functions today. So I really do think the thing that people can do in states, so New Jersey is a member of the compact and has been for some years now. So good work. I think it's a good idea. But what you can do in New Jersey, first of all, is I think, this is self-interest, of course, but buy the book, read it, and educate yourself, because I do think that a lot of the debates over the college suffer because of a misunderstanding on all sides about why it was created, what it did at the founding, what it does today, how it works. And I think these debates will be more productive and more useful when people have them from a place of education and knowledge, rather than of just sort of knee-jerk assumptions about what the college does or doesn't do. So I think reading the book and educating yourself about both the college and the myths that have propped it up for so many decades is a great start. Another thing you can do is, in states that are on the edge or that might consider this compact is, push your friends in those states to talk to their state lawmakers, because that's where it all happens. State lawmakers are the ones who need to adopt this compact. So Virginia, for example, has been on the cusp and has passed it. Like one house of the legislature passed it, and then the other one almost passed it. And they've been negotiating over it for several months now. They may still pass it, and that would get the total number of electoral votes up to 209. Remember, I said the compact needs to get to 270. They're at 196 right now, so they're only 74 short. That's incredible progress. They're more than 2/3 of the way there. But those last 74 electoral votes are going to be a heavy lift. So getting people in those states that might be able to do it. So let's say, I think Michigan, what did I just say, Virginia, perhaps Arizona, you're gonna need to get people to understand the way that the college could harm them individually in order to get them to adopt a change that feels maybe too big or dramatic for them.
So you said that, you know, we need Republican legislators to join with the Democratic legislatures, and there's been a fair amount of that. There hasn't been a fair amount of that in our political life lately. It's been really pretty deeply divided across all fronts. Are there any lessons learned from the work of the advocates for the compact that we can apply to other aspects of our political life?
That's a great question. You know, I do think a lot of it is about, I hate to be so, cynical about it, but a lot of it is about self-interest, political self-interest. And when you make people understand, nobody's just going to say, on principle, I believe in this, I mean, I'll say that, like, I would be happier losing a popular vote election. I would be happier with my candidate losing a popular vote election than what we have now, which I just don't think is a fair system. I wouldn't be happy with it. I would accept it because I think then the rules would be fair. But it's very hard for us generally to step out of those shoes of being a partisan affiliated person. And so I do think one of the things that the Compact advocates have really done successfully is they've done a great job of explaining to people of all political persuasions why the college harms them today as it functions today. So really the only people who should be defending the college, or who are, let me put it this way, who are understandably defending the college, are the swing states, because they're the ones that have the outsized power. So it's understandable why Michiganders or Wisconsinites or Arizonans wouldn't want to get rid of it, because they control the election, right? 77,000 people in 3 upper Midwest states decided the election for 140 million of the rest of us. That's not fair, but they're not going to give up that power willingly. Everyone else, I think, and that's the vast majority of the country, easily more than a majority of the electoral votes in the country, is stuck in the same boat, which is we're basically spectators in the biggest election in the country.
Wow. And that response anticipated one of the questions, which is why would states or candidates not want to switch away from the Electoral College? And the answer is, well, if they're a swing state, they want to hold on tight.
For the swing states only,
if you're in other states and you think that we're doing pretty well with the swing states as a party, you're going to want to stick with this.
And I did mention Michigan as one that could possibly adopt it, and I realize that I'm making slightly contradictory comments because Michigan
we have another question that's come in, Jesse. Given that a vote for president in Texas or Florida counts less than a vote in Rhode Island, let's see, hold on a second. We have actually many questions in here. Let me see if I can expand this chat box.
I don't mind. I don't know what the libraries.
First, how secure are the 15 states' commitment to the compact?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Is there any chance that once they've elected to join, they could reverse it?
Yes, they can. It's a state law. Just like all awarding of electors, all laws awarding electors in the states or state laws, they can reject it. What they can't do is reject it by the contract's own terms. They can't reject it in the 6-month blackout period before Inauguration Day, and that's to prevent political gaming.
Okay.
But let me just say, I see we're also approaching 5, and I don't know what people's availability is or the library's availability, but I'm happy to go over to handle some of these questions because I know we've talked for a while. So.
Let's see if there are other questions in the chat box.
The library is hoping to keep the discussion going until 5:15, 5:20.
Oh, we can do that.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
I mean, we can keep it open until then.
Great.
Thank you for this. This is great.
Just to further address this point of states being able to back out, yes, because it's a state law, it's not a constitutional amendment. States can, if the state changes its mind later, or new state leadership comes in, there's new lawmakers, a different party, they decide they don't like it, they can rescind it. In fact, Colorado is trying to do that right now, not through the legislature, but through a ballot initiative, which will be voted on this November. So it's an interesting test of how ballot initiatives are complicated things, and we'll see what happens in Colorado. But yes, states can back out if they want to. I think the hope among the advocates of the compact is that they will get enough over 270 eventually that it won't, that if one state backed out, it wouldn't negate the whole compact.
What words would you use to tell a Pennsylvania resident why the Electoral College is bad for them?
Well, this definitely connects to the point we were making earlier, which is that residents of swing states are the only ones who have a sort of understandable claim to wanting to keep the system the way it works right now, which is that swing states have all the power. Nobody, as we know from every part of life, nobody gives up power willingly, and so states that have had that power don't want to lose it in the Electoral College. I guess what I would say to them is watch out, because while swing states, while there are only ever a few swing states, they do change over time, and states that are now swing states will not be in the future, and states that were, as states will tell you, that were once swing states are no longer. And I'll just give you an example of that. In the mid-20th century, New York was the biggest and most important swing state in the country. As New York went, so went the country. And the people who swung New York were primarily, from one camp to the other, were primarily racial and ethnic minorities in the cities, in New York City. And so they understood very clearly that the Electoral College gave them an outsized role in the selection of the president. They did not want to give that up. Interestingly, this is a fascinating footnote to the story that we talked about earlier in the 1960s. The Southern segregationists were the ones who filibustered the Electoral College amendment that had passed the House of Representatives. But they were supported by the NAACP and Black lawmakers in the North, who understood very well that the Electoral College helped them too. It gave them outsized leverage in choosing the president because New York was a swing state. So you could say then, how do you tell New Yorkers, and especially how do you tell Black New Yorkers, to give up this unbelievable leverage that they have in choosing the president? And the answer would be, because New York will not always be a swing state. Look ahead to 2020 when New York is a solidly blue state and the candidates don't care a whit about what happens in New York. They come here for money, they come here for media hits and for fundraising, but that's it. They do not campaign here at all. They do not care what New Yorkers want. And that goes for both Joe Biden, for the Democratic candidate, and for the Republican candidate. That's the reality, and it's going to be true in Pennsylvania probably sooner than they would like to think. So the short answer is being a swing state is not a permanent condition.
And the story that you told brought to mind what Lyndon Johnson used to say about a particular person's position on legislation. It basically, It depends on whose ox is being gored, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, it's just, you see the unfairness and the distortion of the system the moment you are on the short end of the stick. And right now, 40 to 45 states every 4 years are on the short end of the stick. Small states, big states, middle-sized states, all states except for those few battleground states. And my argument in the book, and the argument that has been made throughout history, has been that the entire country is a battleground, and the candidates who want to win the highest office in the land should have to treat it like one.
So if all the political strategists whom you spoke to favor this change, or most of them, how many of them are actually putting their effort into bringing about this change?
That's an interesting question. The ones I've spoke to are involved in various ways in political consulting and activism. I've spoke to people from the Clinton campaign, the Obama campaign, George W. Bush, Mitt Romney, McCain, and Kerry and Clinton and Gore. And I think, I don't know of any of them who are actively involved in the compact. So to answer that question, I shouldn't say for sure because I don't know for certain, but none that I know of are actively involved in the compact. I know some of them support the compact in theory and are happy to see it, adopted. I don't know if I don't think they're working, actively toward its adoption. But they do a lot of other really important work on getting voters registered, getting voters involved, and so I think they're still involved in the process.
No, it just seems like when you have that sort of an imbalance, where 6 states actually stand to win, or 5 to gain from it, and then 45 do not. there are 17 different political ads embedded in that thing if you wanted to do issue advertising to get people to actually push this forward.
Yeah.
It would be wonderful to see them involved in putting their talents to that use if this would actually help bring about that change.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yes, I mean, it's not the only way, and I do think that eventually, like say for instance, Texas, Texas, which is trending in the direction of purple and potentially blue within the next decade. If Texas turns blue, and I use that term advisedly, I hate red and blue because no state is red or blue, but if Texas gets a majority Democratic vote within the next decade, Republicans are very quickly going to see the value of a popular vote because the Electoral College will not be a path to the White House anymore if Texas is gone. So I really do think convincing people of their own self-interest in having an election where their vote counts equally to everyone else's in the country is the key to getting this done.
Great. Are there other questions?
We have plenty more questions. Molly, do you mind reading a couple of them?
Of course. The next question that came in was, are you working on another book?
It's funny. James Wilson, we've been talking about James Wilson here, and I'm thrilled to talk about him because he doesn't always come up. I've done dozens of these events around my book, and he doesn't always come up, or he comes up briefly. And so I'm thrilled when I have a chance to talk about him. And I've actually been thinking over the last few months that I would love to work on on a popular history of James Wilson because he's such an important and pivotal founder, and yet nobody has heard of him. And so his story is really, really tragic. If you think Alexander Hamilton had a made for Broadway story, James Wilson's is equally, if not more, dramatic and tragic. And so you get some of the outlines of it in my book, but I do think when I picture what a new book project might be is something on James Wilson and on his influence. He was also one of the associate justices of the first Supreme Court. George Washington appointed him to the Supreme Court, and he wrote several, one very important opinion and several other important opinions in his years on the court. So he's a really fascinating figure, both for his both for the good parts of his personality and the bad parts. So I would love to delve more into his history and how it connects to today.
I'll make some room on my shelf for it if you do.
Thank you.
We have a couple more. Another one is, how do we get rid of gerrymandering?
In 5 words or less.
Sorry, I missed. What was that? Can you repeat the question?
The question was, how do we get rid of gerrymandering?
Oh, yes, that is a tough one. So as we said, the court last year declined finally after more than a decade of hemming and hawing to actually make a ruling saying that certain types of partisan gerrymandering could be so outside the bounds that they would be unconstitutional. I think they were abjectly wrong in that, but that was the decision they made. And the answer is to create citizen redistricting commissions, independent redistricting commissions, and that's been done in I think a dozen states or more. Several other states are considering it. These are Republican states, Democratic states. This is not just a Democratic issue. The problem with that is the court itself, under Chief Justice Roberts, is not a fan of these types of commissions. They upheld one of them in Arizona about 5 years ago by the skin of their teeth. It was a 5-4 vote with Justice Ginsburg writing the majority opinion and Chief Justice Roberts writing a scathing minority, which I think you could tell he hoped he would someday turn into a majority. So even that effort to more fairly draw the lines of the district lines and give us all equal representation could be threatened. One other potential avenue is state Supreme Courts can apply their own constitutions, their own state constitutions to district lines and how they're drawn. Pennsylvania, we saw, has done this and has actually struck down Republican-drawn district lines and ordered the drawing of fairer, more equitable lines, which has been done and actually resulted in, I think, a shift of 3 or 4 House seats to the Democrats in the last election in the 2018 midterms. So, it's not a good system right now. It's not a good. There aren't good prospects for ending partisan gerrymandering. The court has basically washed its hands of it, and the states don't have too many good avenues to get rid of it. But yeah, I'm sorry I don't have a more optimistic answer on that one.
That is the least hopeful thing that you've said the entire hour and 15 minutes we've been talking.
So here, sorry, one last thing is what I'll say is local action really does make a difference. And you've seen this in Michigan in particular. So I'm remiss for leaving out Michigan. A young woman named Katie Fahey, whom I've profiled in the Times, has done amazing work. She's a regular citizen. She had no political background. She was in her late 20s, and she just decided that partisan gerrymandering there was so bad and so unfair. She didn't come at it from a political or partisan perspective. She came at it from just a basic democratic perspective, and she got passed through Michigan a ballot initiative that created a redistricting commission there that has been fought tooth and nail by the Republicans in the state leadership. But that has survived the court challenges. So that kind of on the ground political activism, she literally drove to every county in the state, knocked on doors, got signatures for her ballot initiative, and then got it passed. It was an amazing effort with a tiny budget compared to the kinds of budgets that some of the more powerful interests have. And so she, to me, is a real inspiration in terms of regular citizens making change. So Katie, I would really recommend to you Katie Fahey. In Michigan, go look her up and read about her and read about what she's done and be inspired.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, Molly.
Okay, so this question says, would you give a scenario how a state, for example, Michigan, would be willing to change?
I mean, I think we've addressed this one in a different form before. It's just that states need to see it as in their self-interest to have a national vote for president. And right now, that is in the self-interest, although they don't necessarily see it, of 40 to 45 states, all the states that are not battleground states. Michigan right now is not one. If the question is, how do you convince a battleground state to do it? I don't think there's a good answer to that, because the battleground states won't do it. For the reasons we've said. The good news is that the battleground states never together equal more than several dozen or maybe in the scores of electoral votes. They certainly don't come close to representing a majority of electoral votes. All the other states represent a majority of electoral votes, so all the other states can band together to adopt this compact, or to even say pass a constitutional amendment, for which you need 38 states ratification. So I think there are a couple of paths, the constitutional amendment route or the interstate compact route, that can be done without the states that have a self-interest right now in keeping the system as it is.
Okay, so I am going to come back on now. Thank you both, Jim and Jesse, for that really thoughtful and thought-provoking and deep, sort of widely ranging.
Somebody should hold up the book.
Thank you. Here,
okay.
I got my own.
Guess what?
I love that cover.
I have a book too. All right. So, and I read it. I have a book and I read it, and I led a book group about it, and it was very thought-provoking. So we so appreciate your participation.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, and thank you to Jim, and thanks so much to everybody in the audience for joining us today. Don't forget to check out your handouts at the bottom of the screen. We have a cheat sheet on all of the participants and on the subject of the Electoral College, and also about the book. And we also have read-alikes and watch-alikes that are available for free download from the Montclair Public Library for those who are interested in more political content. And we also have maps, which show the maps that inspired Jesse to start discussing and researching this very interesting topic. Stay tuned for our Open Book, Open Mind online programs in the fall. We're going to be featuring New York Times bestselling novelist Christina Baker Klein and more. And please consider buying the books to support our authors and our partner, Watchung Bookseller, which offers free curbside delivery in Montclair. You can also borrow digital copies of Let the People Pick the President from the library while the building is closed. Stay safe, everybody, and keep reading.
Thanks so much.
You all. Take care.
Thank you.